late 1990s saw a boom in professional wrestling's popularity. The over-the-top characters of the 1980s who told you to eat your vitamins and say your prayers were being phased out. The new crop of talent told you to suck it and brought the Attitude Era to televisions worldwide. You may recall such stars as Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, Kane, or The Undertaker, but today I want to tell you about an incident involving a wrestler known as New Jack. You're listening to The 90s Weren't Real, and this is the infamous mass transit incident. To set the scene for you, it's November of 1996 in Revere, Massachusetts. An aspiring wrestler by the name of Eric Koulas, who is using the ring name Mass Transit, is due to attend an upcoming ECW show. ECW, for anyone unaware, stands for Extreme Championship Wrestling and is owned by Paul Heyman. For those who aren't wrestling fans, the WWF, or World Wrestling Federation, now WWE, or World Wrestling Entertainment, was known for their spectacle style of professional wrestling, with many characters, scripted storylines, and feuds. WWF was one of the two big boys in professional wrestling during this period. You also had WCW, or World Championship Wrestling, which was like a WWF light, as they had acquired a lot of wrestlers who previously worked for the WWF. Their storylines and feuds weren't good usually, but these two companies would begin what was known as the Monday Night Wars, an infamous part of professional wrestling history, and I can get into that on another episode. However, today, we're going to focus on ECW. ECW was both shows' younger cousin who liked to use barbed wire and make people bleed a lot while telling you a story. It was a hardcore variation of professional wrestling with a much smaller budget than the two other companies. You could attend a WWF or WCW show in an arena with an elaborate stage and lighting set up with thousands of other fans. An ECW show could be in a bingo hall with a ring built in the middle, with maybe a couple of hundred other people if they are lucky. It was gritty and violent, and the wrestlers in ECW blurred the lines between what was real and what was fake. When describing the inception of ECW, Paul Heyman in the Rise and Fall of ECW documentary said, "Wrestling needed to change. Wrestling had become the equivalent of hair bands, and we needed wrestling's version of Nirvana to come along and shake everything up." ECW built up a strong fan base in their own right. They weren't afraid to be edgy before edgy became popular. The big boy promotions would take note of ECW to some degree, but again, that's for another episode. So with that information in mind, let's move on with the story. ECW were due to hold what is known as a house show on November 23rd. A house show is a live event that is not televised but may be recorded. Wrestling promotions will tour countries and put on these house shows so fans in different areas, cities, or towns can see their favourite wrestlers beat the hell out of one another. The company had a lot riding on their house shows at the time, as they were yet to hold their first pay-per-view. A pay-per-view is a private televised event that fans must pay to watch or, in today's world, stream. New Jack, as I mentioned earlier, was part of the tag team known as the Gangsters, alongside Mustafa Sayed. They were scheduled to wrestle a match with Devon Dudley and Axel Rotten. However, the latter Axel Rotten could not attend the show due to a family emergency. Eric Koulas, or Mass Transit, was scheduled to wrestle Tiny the Terrible and Half Nelson, both of which are little people. Wrestling and wrestlers can have a sense of humour sometimes, I guess. Due to Axel Rotten's inability to attend, Koulas suggested to ECW owner Paul Heyman that he stand in for him and wrestle the Gangsters alongside Devon Dudley instead. Heyman agreed due to having no other option, and everything went smoothly. Right? Well, not quite. You see, Eric Koulas was only 17 years old at the time. He was a minor and should not have been anywhere near a wrestling ring, or more specifically New Jack. Especially New Jack. I will provide more context on New Jack for you soon, just stick with me for the moment. When approaching Paul Heyman, Koulas told him that he was 21 and had wrestled for the legendary wrestler and trainer Killer Kowalski. Paul Heyman had also asked Koulas if he had bladed before, to which Kulas again lied and told Heyman he had. Blading is where a wrestler uses a hidden blade to cut themselves to make it appear that their opponent's offense had caused them to draw blood. It's all part of the trickery. Because Kulas knew that he could not blade, he approached New Jack and asked him to do it for him, to which New Jack agreed. The match itself was booked to be a squash match. Squash matches are one-sided affairs with one or multiple wrestlers easily defeating their opponent. Prior to the match, New Jack and Mustafa approached Devon Dudley and informed him that they were going to isolate him outside of the ring and that he was not allowed to return, that they were simply going to work over mass transit. So, when it came time for the match, Devon Dudley was forced out of the ring, and New Jack and Mustafa Sayed then double-teamed mass transit. Various weapons were then introduced, such as crutches and toasters. At the end of the match, New Jack bladed mass transit with a scalpel, as they had agreed beforehand. However, New Jack cut too deep and severed 2 arteries in mass transit's forehead. Kulas screamed in pain and passed out as blood streamed from his head. With another professional wrestler, Kulas may have been fine, but New Jack is the worst person to have opposite you in a wrestling ring whilst you bleed out. You see, New Jack was a different breed of wrestler. ECW was known for its hardcore wrestling, but New Jack took it to a whole different level. He was willing to put his body at risk every night. The problem is that he also did not mind putting his opponents at risk too. Part of the art of wrestling is protecting your opponent to the best of your ability. New Jack would tell you the opposite. He was notorious for dangerous spots and shooting on his opponents. If ECW was violent before New Jack, it got worse after he joined the promotion. So while Kulas bled out in the ring, the gangsters continued to hit him with various objects and elbow drops. Kulas' father was in the crowd and screamed out that his son was only 17 and begged an official to ring the bell to stop the match. A group of medics quickly rushed to the ring to offer Kulas aid. New Jack picked up a microphone and shouted, "I hope this fat motherfucker bleeds to death, because I don't give a fuck. I don't care if the motherfucker dies. He's white. I don't like white people. I'm the wrong person to fuck with." These comments were on par with New Jack's character, in case it sounds out of place. New Jack would often rile up the majority white crowds on purpose. New Jack was a heel, also known as a bad guy, so hearing boos or a similar reaction is what New Jack would want to achieve. The story doesn't stop there, as you can imagine. Fans in attendance had camcorders with them and recorded the match. Numerous reports about the incident quickly spread, and ECW's first ever pay-per-view, Barely Legal, was cancelled. It would be reinstated after Heyman convinced the pay-per-view provider that he and the company had been misled by Kulas. Kulas and his family would later be interviewed for Inside Edition. They included footage of the incident, including New Jack blading Kulas after berating him after the match. It depicted Kulas as the innocent victim while vilifying ECW. It did not include details such as how Kulas became part of the match, nor had that been made public as of yet. 3 years after the incident, the Kulas family began legal proceedings. New Jack was tried on charges of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. The jury heard how Kulas himself had asked New Jack to cut him and acquitted New Jack. He was later found not liable in a civil lawsuit too. Authorities determined that Kulas had lied to Paul Heyman about his age and experience. They also found that his father had vouched for him at one point or another, as did one of the other wrestlers that Kulas was supposed to face, Tiny the Terrible. I'm going to let you decide if you feel like Kulas was innocent or not. I don't care to participate in that conversation, as it's a complex issue with multiple facets. What I will say, it had real ramifications, and had ECW been a larger company, it may have prevented the boom in professional wrestling in the late 1990s entirely. It could have been so detrimental to the sport. This is ending on a bit of a sad note, but Eric Kulas died on May 12, 2002 due to complications from gastric bypass surgery. He was 22 years old. New Jack would create further insane and infamous moments in wrestling until his death on May 14th, 2021, after a heart attack. He was 58 years old. He never expressed remorse about the incident. When interviewed and asked about it, he shared distasteful views toward Kulas instead. In his last tweet before his passing, New Jack stated, "I don't feel bad at all. He died years later because he ate himself to death. He also asked me to cut him, so I did." Footage of the incident does exist online. Do I recommend you seek it out? No. It is brutal and goes on for far longer than needed. Will some of you do it anyway? Probably. If you fall down the ECW rabbit hole, it is a crazy ride, so be warned. If you want more information on this subject and New Jack, Vice's Dark Side of the Ring did a great episode about him, and you can also check out the rise and fall of ECW. It's very briefly mentioned there, but it is a big part of their history. If you somehow end up down a very specific New Jack rabbit hole, I'm going to apologize now, because when I mentioned that he created further infamous and insane moments, some of those include beating up a 70-plus-year-old man and also stabbing someone in the middle of a wrestling match. So be warned on that. But that's all I've got time for this week. I appreciate you being here and listening to me talk about all the things that happened in the 90s that are just absolutely wacky. I'll see you next time.